Jayam Vishnupad Paramhansa Paribrajakacharya Astottara Satyashishimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mathura Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. ये कहाँ से है? हाँ? नीचे? नीचे? अच्छा वो जो ड्रिंकिंग वाटर से? ठीक है. नॉर्मल. हाँ ठीक है. Today we're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita Volume 4. Srila Prabhupada is in Los Angeles and he has detected some discrepancies within the society. So we're continuing now. This picture is the deities that Srila Prabhupada used to worship when he was a young boy at the Malak Bhavan in Calcutta. The Radha Krishna deity in this family called me to meet him, and therefore last time when I was in Calcutta, I stayed in that temple along with my American disciples. Although I had immense opportunities to indulge in the four principles of sinful life, because I was connected with a very aristocratic family, Krishna always saved me, and throughout my whole life, I do not know what is illicit sex, intoxication, meat eating, or gambling. So far my present life is concerned, I do not remember any part of my life when I was forgetful of Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada here is answering a question that one of his disciples, Tamal Krishna, had written from. Tamal Krishna was in France at the time. Prabhupada had sent him to expand Sankirtan in Europe. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj asked, he wasn't a Maharaj at the time, he was a Grihasta. He asked Prabhupada, what were you in your previous life? So Srila Prabhupada responded that there are three ways to attain perfection. You can be a Kripa Siddha, that means by the mercy of the Supreme Lord or a pure devotee. You can be a Sadhana Siddha, that means by practicing devotional service, you can attain perfection. Or you can be a Nitya Siddha. A Nitya Siddha is a person who, as Prabhupada explained here, he never fell down in this lifetime. And then he went on to explain that, let's see if we can get to the next. It's not working. Okay. Yes. Okay. He quoted from the Bhagavad-Gita that the unsuccessful yogi, he takes birth either in an aristocratic family or in a very wealthy family. And Srila Prabhupada had both of those amenities in his lifetime. He was born in the Mullik family in Calcutta, and which was very wealthy. And his father was a pure devotee who trained him in Krishna consciousness from his childhood. Prabhupada thought, in the classes he would speak of this only indirectly, as he had when he had exposed that the leaders and devotees weren't chanting and reading enough. Consequently, most devotees were unaware of Prabhupada's anxiety. But occasionally, while sitting in his room or in the garden, Prabhupada would express his concern. He wanted his disciples to manage ISKCON, but to do so they must be pure. Only then would he be able to concentrate on writing books. So by this time there were 34 temples all around the world. Prabhupada had begun sending devotees to Europe and then to the Pacific Rim, to Tokyo, Australia, Hong Kong. We'll see the list later. And Srila Prabhupada, it wasn't possible for him to be in all of these places at one time managing. So he wanted to train his senior disciples how to manage the society so that Prabhupada can concentrate on the one thing that only he could do, which was translating the books and getting the books printed. And therefore, for his senior disciples to take over the management of the society, they had to be pure. And Prabhupada discovered that some of the devotees weren't even completing their 16 rounds every day. So Prabhupada was imploring his disciples that, how am I going to write these books? I can't do the management and the writing at the same time. I want to train you to become managers of the society. But unless you're pure in your activities, how will you be able to manage? In June, he wrote to Brahmananda, now my desire is that I completely devote my time in the matter of writing and translating books. An arrangement should now be done that our society be managed automatically. I think we should have a central governing body for dealing with important matters. I have already just talked with Gargamuni about this. So if you come back by the Rath Yatra festival, we can have a preliminary meeting at San Francisco in this connection. So you remember that Brahmananda first joined, and then his younger brother Gargamuni joined at 26 Second Avenue. And Brahmananda was the first temple president at 26 Second Avenue. So he was running the affairs on the East Coast from New York. Gargamuni, he went to the West Coast, and he was now the temple president of the Los Angeles temple. So they both had very responsible positions, and they were one of the senior-most disciples of Prabhupada, being initiated. Brahmananda was initiated on Janmashtami. Sanju. Brahmananda was initiated 1966 on Janmashtami, and Gargamuni later was initiated in November. So these were some of the disciples that Prabhupada was training to take over the management. In July, Prabhupada visited San Francisco for the 4th annual ISKCON Rath Yatra. It was the biggest festival ever, with 10,000 people joining in the procession through Golden Gate Park to the beach. Prabhupada felt ill and didn't join the parade until about midway. He danced in the road before the carts as 100 disciples encircled him, chanting and playing kartals and mridanga. So Los Angeles is in the south of California, and then San Francisco, it's about a 3-hour car ride up the coast of the Pacific Ocean to get to San Francisco. So the first temple in California was in San Francisco on Frederick Street, and they had the first Rath Yatra in 1967. So 67, 68, 69, now it's 1970. This is the fourth Rath Yatra. And this Rath Yatra was absolutely wonderful. 10,000 people took part behind the 3 carts. And when Prabhupada did reach the Venu, where the carts were rolling through the park, he was in such ecstasy that he began to dance before the carts like this, and all the devotees were so happy to be around him. Afterward, Prabhupada wanted to ride in the cart, just as he had done the year before, but some of his disciples restrained him. A gang of hoodlums, they said, had caused trouble earlier, and for Prabhupada to ride on the cart might be dangerous. He disagreed, but finally relented and rode in his car to the beach. So Gargamuni explained to me what happened. In America, there's a lot of racism between the different colors of people, the white people, the black people, and then there are the red people who are the American Indians, and then there are the yellow people who are the Orientals, but in particular, the whites and the blacks. So the blacks, they were brought as slaves forcibly from Africa in the very early days when America was just first being set up by the Europeans. So the black people remained underprivileged in America, and there was discrimination as well. In some states, the black people couldn't attend the same schools as the white people, things like that. A lot of discrimination between towards the black people. So some of the black people, the young people, they became militants, that we want our rights. We want to be able to live just like everyone else. We're not slaves anymore. You've given us freedom and we want to live like everyone else. And they would carry guns. And particularly the police would subjugate, they would torture these black people, sometimes killing them for no reason. It still goes on in America. So there was one group called the Black Panthers, and they specifically wanted the rights of the black people. And they had come and made trouble at the Rath Yatra earlier in the day. And they threatened the devotees that we're going to kill your leader. So the devotees were very, very worried that when Prabhupada arrives, we have to protect him. And if Prabhupada is visible sitting on the carts, they were afraid that that would be, because they always carried guns, the Black Panthers. So what the devotees did was, Gargamuni told me, was they had Prabhupada in a car and they took him on a very, very long route through the park so that he couldn't get to the Rath Yatra in time. They were trying to save his life, but Prabhupada didn't understand that. And when he got to the site where the carts were rolling by, as usual, he wanted to go sit on the carts, but they made an excuse that it's not safe, Prabhupada. So then he stood before the carts and was dancing, but for safety's sake, they didn't want Prabhupada to sit on the cart, and he was very upset by this, because the boys were on the cart where Prabhupada used to be, but they wouldn't allow him on the cart. So this really made an impression on Prabhupada. At the Family Dog Auditorium, that means after the long procession through the beautiful park, they had a huge convention at what's called the Family Dog Auditorium. It's just a huge, huge hall. On the beach, Prabhupada began his lecture. I want to thank you all for coming. Although I am not well, I felt it my responsibility to come. As you have so kindly attended Lord Jagannath's Rath Yatra festival, I felt it my duty to come and see you and address you. His voice was frail. So the spiritual master's health is relative to the disciple's spiritual health. When the disciple's spiritual health would degrade, Prabhupada would become physically ill. That happened here in Vrindavan also. So Prabhupada was noticing discrepancies of the consciousness of some of his disciples, such as not allowing him on the cart. And this made him physically ill, actually. So therefore, even when Prabhupada spoke, he mentioned that he wasn't feeling very well and his voice was frail. As the leader of the Hare Krishna movement, he should have ridden on the cart. Not only had his disciples refused him, citing a threat of danger, but several disciples had prominently ridden on the cart, as if in his place. Prabhupada asked the many temple presidents assembled for the Rath Yatra to meet and discuss forming a governing body to manage ISKCON. The devotees met and then reported that they thought only one of them should be elected the chief representative. They hadn't understood. The strength should be in a group, Prabhupada said, not in a single individual. Since he was ISKCON's founder Acharya, what need was there for another single leader? He asked them to meet again. So this Rath Yatra was so big and so attractive that many of the leaders came to take part in the Rath Yatra. And that's why when Prabhupada saw that so many of his leaders had come, he asked them to meet to form this committee, the governing body commission. But they didn't understand what he wanted. He wanted a group because there's a saying, when we're together, we're strong, and when we're divided, then we become weak. Divided, we fall. So Prabhupada wanted his senior-most disciples to manage the society for him so that he could concentrate on the writing. But they misunderstood. They thought that, no, we'll have a next person take the society. Prabhupada said, no, I'm already here. I am that person. I want you as a group to manage, because strength is in cooperation together. Returning to Los Angeles, Prabhupada announced he would award 6 disciples the sannyas order. The devotee community excitedly prepared for the festival. The sannyasis, Prabhupada said, would leave their temples to travel and preach. It was an unprecedented change for ISKCON, a sensation, and the devotees loved it. Although Prabhupada was awarding sannyas to some of his most advanced disciples, he also said the sannyas initiation was to purify these disciples and to rid them of their entanglement in material desires. He set the initiation for the end of July, 2 weeks later. So these 6 disciples, it was Brahmananda, Gargamuni, Vishnujan, Subal, Devananda, and the 6th one, I don't know whether it was Kartikeya or Revati Nandan, because I wasn't in Los Angeles at the time. We were on the East Coast, and our temple president, Subal, was one of those young men who Prabhupada called to take sannyas. Now, some of these devotees had performed discrepancies, and Prabhupada wanted to purify them with this sannyas initiation, because they had become very powerful within the society, and now mistakes were being made, such as not allowing Prabhupada on the cart. So he wanted to take them out of their powerful positions and have them just concentrate on traveling and preaching as a sannyasi should do. Prabhupada had already made one sannyasi, that was Kirtanananda, when he had come back here to Vrindavan in 1967, when he needed Ayurvedic treatment after his stroke. So Kirtanananda was the only sannyasi at that time, but he spent most of his time in New Vrindavan developing the farm project. So now there were going to be 6 new sannyasis who would travel all over the world and enliven the devotees in Sankirtan. And all of us were very excited about this because they were all very big Sankirtan leaders, very good preachers, and we were looking forward to them coming to our temples to take part in Sankirtan with us. So it was a big step in the movement when Prabhupada decided to make these sannyasis. One day in Los Angeles, a visiting devotee speaking with Prabhupada in his room humbly asked why Prabhupada hadn't answered his questions in a recent letter. Prabhupada remembered no such letter. Inquiring from his secretary, Prabhupada discovered that his secretary often showed incoming letters to certain temple leaders who, at their discretion, would sometimes withhold letters they considered petty or too disturbing. So, Prabhupada by this time was running the society basically through correspondence, because his main objective at this time in ISKCON in July of 1970 was he wanted to set up the world headquarters in Los Angeles. So he was spending several months there to make it an ideal temple so that all of the leaders could come there to learn how to do deity worship, Sankirtan, management, book distribution, everything. So he had his secretary. Now, on each letter, you'll see, at the end of the letter, Prabhupada would always write, your ever well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. And then underneath that would be his initials, ACBS, with a colon, 2 dots, and then the initials of his secretary. So you see here DB, and then you see DS, right? All different initials you'll see in every one of Prabhupada's letters. You'll see those initials. So at that time, Devananda Brahmachari was Prabhupada's secretary, and he would take the dictation. He would give the letters to Prabhupada. Prabhupada would read them, and then Prabhupada would give his dictation, and then Devananda would type the letter, have Prabhupada sign it, and mail the letter. But Devananda sometimes would take those letters before Prabhupada even saw them and show them to other disciples, godbrothers. And if they felt that the letter was too disturbing or not worth Prabhupada's time to answer, they wouldn't even give Prabhupada the letter. So he was one of the devotees who Prabhupada gave sannyas to, and you'll see here, just soon after, his initials changed to DS, Devananda Swami. So this was a great discrepancy, that the secretary himself was withholding Prabhupada's letters. We had an example. I put this picture because Brahmananda is walking behind Prabhupada as Prabhupada's entering into the temple at Los Angeles. So our first temple president, Dhananjaya, he tells the story that it was he who arranged with George Harrison to get the Bhaktivedanta Manor, and he was doing a lot of service in London, in England. But there was a struggle between 2 managers there. And one of the managers, he gave Dhananjaya a very confidential letter and asked Dhananjaya to come all the way to Mayapur to personally deliver that letter to Prabhupada because he wanted Prabhupada to understand what was going on in London. Dhananjaya came all the way to Mayapur, and when Brahmananda saw him, he said, "You better not give that letter to Prabhupada." And Brahmananda was very big, and everyone was afraid of him. He was known for getting devotees up against the wall if they did anything that he didn't like. So Dhananjaya, he wasn't allowed to give that letter to Prabhupada. So this happened a lot. I also wrote a letter to Prabhupada. I asked him when I got my second initiation, Prabhupada, I never got a response. He never was even given the letter. And after I told him that, then the secretary gave it to Prabhupada for him to reply. So this was going on, and Prabhupada knew nothing about it until this one devotee came and told him about it. Prabhupada was outraged. How dare they come between him and his other disciples? How could they presume to make such decisions on their own? How could a disciple censor his spiritual master's mail? Although Prabhupada reprimanded the devotees involved, that meant his secretary, the incident only increased the already heavy burden on his mind. Again, the thought of spiritual disease transmitted in letters from India disturbed him. So this spiritual disease Prabhupada was talking about, we discussed it last week. Prabhupada felt that the spiritual disease was coming because when Prabhupada went in 1967 to India, some of his disciples stayed in India, and they were staying at the Gaudiya Math, and they were getting different ideas than what Prabhupada had taught within ISKCON, and sending those ideas, writing letters back to their godbrothers in America and Europe. And this caused a lot of confusion amongst the disciples because what they were saying was different from what Prabhupada was teaching. So that was called a spiritual disease. He found no one close to him in Los Angeles with whom he could speak confidentially about this serious minimization of the spiritual master. As his anxiety affected him bodily, he fell ill and stopped eating. Now, the leaders who were around him were the same people who were committing these offenses, such as Gargamuni and Gargamuni who had kept Prabhupada from going on the cart, things like that. So again, Prabhupada became ill simply because of the activities of his disciples. Karandar. I'd heard some things, but in the spirit of going on, it had all been glossed over. And Prabhupada didn't talk much about it either. Prabhupada felt that he couldn't confide in anyone there, so he didn't speak about it. He kept it all inside, and that's what made him physically sick. One time, though, I was in his room right after the sannyasis had left Los Angeles. This is after Prabhupada had given them the initiation of sannyas. And he asked me if I understood what had gone on. I said, well, I think so, but I didn't really know very much. At that time, the devotees who were going out on Sankirtan were in the alleyway chanting, and Prabhupada was at his desk. So Prabhupada was sitting at his desk on the upper floor, and out of Prabhupada's window, he could hear the devotees chanting, about to go on Sankirtan on the road. Hearing the kirtan, he turned back, looking in the direction of the devotees below his window, and smiled. Then he turned to me. They're innocent, he said. Do not involve them in this business. So the majority of the devotees had no idea what was going on with the problems Prabhupada was facing in the society, because the management was just a few devotees, and the mass of devotees, they were engaged in their devotional service of Sankirtan and deity worship and cooking and offering and preaching and giving classes. Everything was going on as normal. But Prabhupada was seeing the discrepancies, And this is what was making him sick. So he explained to Karunda, these devotees, they're innocent. For instance, when Prabhupada made the 6 sannyasis, he immediately sent them out preaching. And they went to all the temples all over, and the devotees were so happy that the sannyasis were coming and doing nice sankirtan. And even I wrote to Prabhupada, I thanked him. I said, oh, thank you so much for sending the 4 sannyasis. They're leading sankirtan so nicely. We were all so happy. We didn't know that Prabhupada had actually punished these devotees by giving them sannyas. So none of us understood all of that. That was just Prabhupada's way of purifying his disciples. Karundar still didn't understand, and he wondered what not to. There's some talking going on there. You ask them to go out, please. You can go out if you need to talk. Oh, you're translating. What language? Oh, wonderful. Okay, thank you. Karundar still didn't understand, and he wondered what not to involve them in. Karundar was one of the innocent devotees just going on with his service. He did know, however, that a shadow was hanging over the heads of the sannyasis. Prabhupada requested 3 trusted disciples to come be with him in Los Angeles. So these were disciples who were running temples in other parts of America. Rupanuga. This is Rupanuga. I was in Buffalo. Buffalo is the northern part of New York, the state of New York, just on the border of Canada. And Rupanuga was giving it was a yoga class at the University of Buffalo. And he was making so many devotees from that yoga class. So he was running that temple very, very nicely. Just an impeccably wonderful disciple of Prabhupada. That's his son, Akendra. Rupanuga. I was in Buffalo, and the phone rang. Someone said, Srila Prabhupada is on the telephone. I said, what? You're kidding. It wasn't Srila Prabhupada, but it was his servant, Devananda. Devananda said, Srila Prabhupada wants you to come to Los Angeles. I said, what's wrong? He said, well, he doesn't want, and then he said, Srila Prabhupada wants to talk about it now. So Srila Prabhupada got on the phone, and as soon as I heard him on the line, I paid my obeisances. Then I said, Srila Prabhupada, what's wrong? He said, you didn't know I was ill? I said, no. He said, you should come immediately. Then I said, Srila Prabhupada, let me speak to Devananda. I didn't know what was going on, so I asked Devananda, tell me what's going on. Then he said, Srila Prabhupada said he will talk with you when you come. He will explain everything. So you have to remember, in those days, there was no social media. The only way we had to communicate with each other was through telephone or through letters. And the letters would take a few days to reach. And all the devotees who were at temples all around the world, they didn't know what was going on in Los Angeles. So Rupanuga, although he was doing so much preaching, he didn't know anything about what was happening. So Devananda couldn't tell him he was part of the problem. Prabhupada had just given him sannyas. So he said that Prabhupada will tell him when he comes. Bhagavan Das. There's Bhagavan Das. He was one of the students who became a devotee under Rupanuga's Yoga Society. And he was sent to Detroit to open a temple with his wife, Krishna Bhamini. So he was doing a lot of wonderful preaching there in Detroit, making devotees. There are a lot of universities in that area. One day after coming back from Sankirtan, I received a call from Rupanuga, who told me he was on his way to Los Angeles, having received a call from Prabhupada that there was some disturbance there. He couldn't tell me more, but he said he would call me when he returned. This set my mind reeling. I sat in the chair, hot and sweaty, after coming back from Sankirtan, my mind absorbed in thinking of Prabhupada and what could be going on. I called Los Angeles to talk to Prabhupada's secretary, Devananda, who told me he couldn't really say anything at that point. I was hoping somehow or other I would get more information of the situation, but after waiting some time, I went in to take my shower. So we also didn't have big temples in those days. We had small houses or shops that we would rent and turn them into temples. And our one activity was Sankirtan. We would go out on Sankirtan all day and hand out literature and hand out invitation cards for classes and for the Sunday feasts. So, as usual, Bhagavan was out all day on Sankirtan, and when he came back, he got Rupanuga's phone call about this. So now he's gone in to take his shower after getting back from Sankirtan. I was in the shower when all of a sudden someone banged on the door. Prabhupada is on the telephone. He wants to speak with you. I was sure there was some misunderstanding. How is it possible that the spiritual master could be on the telephone? Anyway, I ran out of the shower all wet and picked up the telephone and said, "Hello?" There was a long pause. Then all of a sudden I heard Srila Prabhupada's voice on the other end. "Bhagavan Das?" "Yes," I said. "Srila Prabhupada, please accept my humble obeisances. How can I serve you?" I was completely stunned. Then Prabhupada's voice came slowly on the phone. "There are many things that you will do, but the first thing is that you must come here immediately." I said, "Of course, Srila Prabhupada, I will be there right away." And with that, we both hung up. So Bhagavan was one of Prabhupada's primary disciples. After firmly establishing the Detroit temple, Prabhupada sent Bhagavan to Europe, and he established so many temples all over Europe. Thousands of devotees were made, book distribution, everything. So Prabhupada, he knew that Bhagavan would be able to do all of this in Krishna consciousness. But at this point, he wanted Bhagavan to come immediately because he wanted to share with Bhagavan and Rupanuga, Bhagavan, what was going on. I managed to gather the money together to take the flight to Los Angeles. And when I got on the plane in Detroit, it just so happened that Rupanuga was also on the same plane. We sat together and discussed what could possibly be happening in Los Angeles to cause Srila Prabhupada so much distress. When we arrived at the airport, Karundar picked us up and told us that some of the older devotees had been plotting against Prabhupada, and that day Prabhupada had given several of the men sannyas and sent them away to preach. This was all quite amazing to me, and I didn't really know what to make of it. When we came into Prabhupada's room, he looked distressed and was rubbing his head, complaining of the blood pressure that was caused by the conspiracy. So Prabhupada was trying to clear this up in the best way he could, not by chastising, not by punishing, actually by elevating his disciples, by giving them sannyas so they could simply concentrate on the holy name and preaching and traveling. Tamal Krishna. I had written Srila Prabhupada a lengthy letter from Paris. So Prabhupada, few weeks back, we might remember that when the 6 devotees were in London, they were mostly concentrating on getting the temple, the first Radha Krishna temple there in London at Bury Place. And they were associating with the Beatles to get these records made. And they were going on all of these tours to chant Hare Krishna from the records all over Europe. So Prabhupada sent Tamal Krishna to London because the devotees at that time in London were not concentrating on Sankirtan or book distribution, which Tamal Krishna had set up very effectively in California. So Prabhupada sent him to set up Sankirtan and book distribution in London. So that put him now in Europe. And from London, he went to Paris and he started developing temples all over Europe from there. So Tamal had just written Prabhupada a long letter from Paris describing how we wanted to expand our preaching efforts in Europe. And suddenly I received a telegram from His Divine Grace that said, "Received your letter 26 July. Come Los Angeles immediately." So that was another way that we had communication in those days. Nowadays, for all of you youngsters, telegram means an app on your phone. But in those days, we had telegrams, real telegrams, where they would tick, 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 and that would become a letter. And you get these little telegrams. You'd have to go to the post office and get them delivered or get them sent. And it was the way emails were in those days. You can instantly they could be sent. It was the only way we could do things quickly. So Prabhupada sent a telegram because it was urgent. I was quite surprised, and I remember disentangling myself that very day and leaving that night, even though I was in charge of the activities there. When I arrived in Los Angeles, I found Rupanuga, Bhagavan, Kirtanananda Swami, and Karandar. So Prabhupada had also called Kirtanananda Swami. I was in a very enthusiastic, blissful mood from having done so much Sankirtan, and I had no idea of any difficulty. But these devotees were all in a heavy, sober, somber mood, and they tried to explain to me what was going on. But actually, I could not get a very clear understanding. I had arrived in the late afternoon, and I could not see Srila Prabhupada. Early the next morning, when Prabhupada was informed that I had arrived, he called for me before Mangal Artik, because Prabhupada would be up all night translating. I went up to his quarters, and when I came through the door, Prabhupada was sitting in his room with his head downward. He looked up, and he appeared to be almost ill. He was gaunt. Gaunt means when your face goes thin from worry, and looked very sorrowful. He said meekly, just as I was bowing down, "Have they told you?" Of course, I hadn't really understood everything, but in reply to his question, I said, "Yes, they have told me some things." And Prabhupada said, "Can you help me?" So I answered, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." He said, "Can you take me out of here?" I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." Of course, I didn't feel that I could help Srila Prabhupada, but I could understand that I had to say yes. How can you say no, I won't? But how far could I help? It's like lifting the heaviest object in the world. The Guru is so heavy, and yet I had to say yes. So Prabhupada asked me next, "Where will you take me?" And I said, "Well, we can go to Florida." At that time, we had a very nice temple in Florida being run by Abhiram, who was also a very nice devotee. He said, "No, that is not far enough." I said, "I could take you to Europe." He said, "No, that also will not be good. The problem may be there also." So anyway, we didn't conclude where to go at that time, but Prabhupada said, "It is like a fire here. I must leave at once. It has become like a fire. So this whole situation had upset Srila Prabhupada so much that even though his spiritual master had ordered him, you go to the Western countries, you preach in English, and now Prabhupada, he said it had become like a fire because of the offenses being committed by his disciples. Prabhupada confided in Rupanuga, Tamal Krishna, and Bhagavan about the various incidents: his mail withheld, his name misprinted when they printed his name wrong on the book in Boston, his riding in the Rath Yatra parade restricted. He mentioned these and other indications that certain persons wanted to move him into the background, out of the reach of his disciples. He didn't want to stay in Los Angeles. He didn't want to stay in the United States. He didn't even want to go to Europe. He wanted to leave the arena of his disciples' offenses. But before leaving, he wanted to complete his plans for establishing a governing body to manage ISKCON. So Prabhupada wasn't being irresponsible. He wanted to leave because of the fire that was being ignited there with the offenses. But he wasn't going to leave until he established the governing body commission. To this end, he dictated the following on July 28th. I, the undersigned, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, disciple of Om Vishnupad Paramhansa 108 Sri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada, came in the United States in 1965 on September 18th for the purpose of starting Krishna consciousness movement. For 1 year I had no shelter. I was traveling in many parts of this country. Then in 1966, July, I incorporated this society under the name and style, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, briefly, ISKCON. Gradually the society increased, and one after another branches were opened. Now we have got 34 branches enlisted herewith. As we have increased our volume of activities, now I think a governing body commission, hereinafter referred to as the GBC, should be established. I am getting old, 75 years old. Therefore, at any time, I may be out of the scene. Therefore, I think it is necessary to give instruction to my disciples how they shall manage the whole institution. They are already managing individual centers represented by one president, one secretary, and one treasurer. And in my opinion, they are doing nice. But we want still more improvement in the standard of temple management, propaganda for Krishna consciousness, distribution of books and literatures, opening of new centers, and educating devotees to the right standard. Therefore, I have decided to adopt the following principles, and I hope my beloved disciples will kindly accept them. So now Prabhupada is manifesting this GBC. Prabhupada then listed the names of the 12 persons who would form the GBC. So originally we had 12 GBC. Number 1, Sriman Rupanuga Das Adhikari. So we know about Rupanuga. He was managing there in Buffalo. Number 2, Sriman Bhagavan Das Adhikari. Bhagavan was there in Detroit. Number 3, Sriman Shyamasundar Das Adhikari. Shyamasundar was in London. Number 4, Sriman Satsvarup Das Adhikari. Satsvarup was overseeing the Boston Temple and the ISKCON Press in Boston. Number 5, Sriman Karandar Das Adhikari. Karandar was there with Prabhupada in Los Angeles, managing. Number 6, Sriman Hansaduta Das Adhikari. Hansaduta from 26 Second Avenue, he went to Montreal. So we have the temple in Montreal, and later he also went to Germany, Hantaduta and his wife, Himavati. Number 7, Sriman Tamal Krishna Das Adhikari. Tamal Krishna was in charge of Europe at the time. Number 8, Sriman Sudama Das Adhikari. Sudama had been sent to Tokyo, Japan, with his wife Chintamani, and they were running a center there, trying to develop for the first time in Asia, ISKCON. Number 9, Sriman Bali Mardan Das Brahmachari. So Bali Mardan, he also joined in New York, and he was sent along the Pacific Rim, which meant Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong, all the different places on the Pacific coast, on the other side of the Pacific coast. Number 10, Sriman Jagadish Das Adhikari. Jagadish was in Toronto, in Canada, with his wife Lakshmi Moni. And number 11, Sriman Hayagriva Das Adhikari. He was there with Kirtanananda in New Vrindavan. He was, you'll remember, Hayagriva was the first person who met Prabhupada on the street, 26 Second Avenue. He brought his friends, and in that way, Krishna consciousness developed in New York. And number 12, Sriman Krishnadas Adhikari. Krishnadas joined in San Francisco. His sister was Sharadiya, who we heard about in Boston. And Krishnadas went to Germany to help Shivananda with opening the temple there. So you'll notice out of 12 GBC, all but one are Adhikaris. Adhikari is the name that Prabhupada gave to Grihastas. They're all married men, because Prabhupada found that the married couples, they were able to establish temples very nicely. So all but Bali Mardan, later he became an Adhikari, but at this time he was still a brahmachari, and Prabhupada would make him into a sannyasi, and then from sannyas he took Prabhupada's permission to also get married. But that was many years later. Now he's a simple brahmachari, preaching a lot on the Pacific Rim. He wrote a book about that also. So Prabhupada is empowering his Grihastha disciples to take over the management of ISKCON through the GBC. Oh, one little quote. So those who are GBCs, they should be very, very careful to administer the business of ISKCON. Otherwise, they will be punished. As the post is very great, similarly, the punishment is also very great. That is the difficulty. So it might have appeared to be a blessing that Prabhupada has chosen me to become a GBC, but the responsibility was so great, and if you didn't fulfill that responsibility, the punishment would also be very great. So they had a lot of responsibility to take off of Prabhupada's shoulders. These personalities are now considered as my direct representatives. While I am living, they will act as my zonal secretaries. Zones means different parts of the world were under these zonal secretaries. And after my demise, they will be known as executors. So now we hear, we're fast forwarding to 1977 in June. Srila Prabhupada reaffirmed the position of the GBC in his final will, drafted in June 1977. The Governing Body Commission, GBC, will be the ultimate managing authority of the entire International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Through legal documents, training, and discourse, Srila Prabhupada clearly identified the GBC as the highest managerial body in ISKCON. At present, the GBC body is comprised of 34 members. That's because ISKCON has expanded so much, who are individually responsible for overseeing the management and spiritual standards of ISKCON centers in assigned geographic regions. Those are called zones. GBC members also supervise specific projects, initiatives, and ministries. Following the instructions of Srila Prabhupada, the GBC convenes yearly in Mayapur, West Bengal, for their annual general meeting, during which time they discuss proposals, specific issues, and projects within ISKCON, and pass resolutions by way of a voting process. So this original GBC body was established at this time in 1970 by Srila Prabhupada, and it has continued up until the present day. So now we, instead of only 12 GBC, because the preaching has expanded so much all over the world, we presently have 34 GBC members. Prabhupada further described the role of the sannyasis. I have already awarded sannyas, or the renounced order of life, to some of my students, and they have also got very important duties to perform in this connection. The sannyasis will travel to our different centers for preaching purpose, as well as enlightening the members of the Center for Spiritual Advancement. So you had two different scenarios going on. You had the management being done by the GBC, who were also overseeing the spiritual activities of the devotees, and you had the sannyasis who would be traveling all over the world to enliven the devotees and enlighten them for spiritual advancement, who were ideally not supposed to take part in the management, although later many of these sannyasis became GBC members. Now, this is a picture of Srila Prabhupada and the devotees, 1976. You can see all the dandas there. Prabhupada had made many sannyasis by that time for traveling and preaching all over the world. Prabhupada's later instructions and letters would set forth general directions for the GBC secretaries. They should travel regularly to the temples in their respective zones to ensure that each devotee chanted 16 rounds and followed a regulated schedule, and that the temples were clean. So this was the priority that Prabhupada was setting. They had to make sure the devotees were chanting their 16 rounds. They had to make sure that in the temple, the regulated schedule was going on, and that the temple was clean. His 12 GBC secretaries would relieve him of management, and they would rectify present and future difficulties within the society. So this would be a great burden taken off of Srila Prabhupada if these 12 GBC members would take over the management. So I chose this picture because you have here, this is Jagadish, this is Shyamsundar, there's Bhagavan, there's Balimardan, and behind Bhagavan is Karandar. So you've got 5 of those 12 here in this. Oh yes, and behind Prabhupada is Kirtananda Swami. So Prabhupada did not make him a GBC. He was a sannyasi who was going to travel and preach, which he did. He would come and visit the temples and give nice lectures and go to programs. All right, so now the time is over. We have a lot more, but we're up to number 24, and we had 52 ready for today. So next week we'll continue. Hare Krishna. Jai.